Welcome back. I'm Mr. Sturgeon and welcome to my classroom. We're going to dive into Unit 2, the Constitution, and then the separation of powers for this unit. We're going to kind of continue where we left off with Unit 1 when we talked about the Declaration of Independence and Federalists and Anti-Federalists, and we're going to look at the what came about after the struggles of our nation, like Shays Rebellion and all those kind of infightings that we had. So we are actually going to start with something called the Great Compromise for Lesson 2.1. If you are taking the AP exam, I would put this on a very high priority to understand. I've seen it come up in FRQs. I've seen it come up in multiple choice questions. So I definitely would re-look at this video if you are studying for the AP exam. Now, if you're not studying for the AP exam, that's okay, because this is something that you should understand as well, just for our current government. And we had this massive dilemma when we first started our government. It really was, how can we have a strong central government with enough to preserve order, but not too strong that it would threaten the liberty of the people and our freedoms? Now, that might sound familiar because we just talked about Thomas Hobbes, who had those same beliefs. He had those same kind of fears that, yes, we're going to have chaos if we don't have a government, but if we have too strong of a government, they might never give power back. So he thought that there should be a balance of government and freedom, but he did think government was necessary to protect those freedoms. And this is also going to be a strong belief of many Federalists. So Federalists believed in that strong central government because they want to protect people's rights, people's property. And so you're going to see, again, a few differing viewpoints in this unit on what our government should look like. The first two different viewpoints that we're going to look at is the Virginia Plan and the New Jersey Plan. Remember, we had the Constitutional Convention that took place after Shays Rebellion, and they said we need to either get rid of the articles or we need to edit them. We need to, revise them. And so when the Congress came together, there were two main plans. The first plan was called the Virginia Plan. And what that plan called for is it wanted a strong national government to protect people's freedoms and rights. It proposed three branches, which, if you remember from the Enlightenment thinkers, that's Montesquieu, that's going to be John Locke. So as you see, our founding fathers are really taking from those Enlightenment thinkers and putting it in our current government. And then this is the main thing you should know about the Virginia Plan. The Virginia Plan wanted a Congress, and they wanted the Congress to be two houses, the House of Reps and the Senate. Now, what they wanted was they wanted representation based on your population size. So at the time, and still is, Virginia is considered a big state. A lot of people live there. It's relatively large in terms of land size. And so what they wanted to protect big states' interests. Because more people live there, they're representing more people. So they should have more representatives. In theory, that makes perfect sense. Now, they wanted at least one of the houses to be elected directly by the people. And this was majorly forward thinking. This is one of the first times that we actually all can elect our representatives that make our laws. Now, again, there's some caveats to that. Yes, slaves could not elect anybody to represent them. Women technically didn't get the right to vote till the 19th Amendment. So you still don't have everybody electing your representatives, but still, they wanted one house elected by the people. So they wanted two houses represented by population size, and they wanted one of the houses to be elected by the people. Those were the main points from the Virginia Plan. Now, the New Jersey Plan was slightly different. The New Jersey Plan, it did want a strong national government, so it agreed there. It thought, we do need something to protect our rights and freedoms. They actually proposed just to amend the articles, not replace them. They didn't think they needed to be thrown out, even though there were weaknesses. They said, you know what? We can edit this, we can amend it, and it'll still work. But here's where it's different. They wanted each state to only have one vote. And this is where these two plans differ. You have Virginia, which is a big state. It obviously wants representation based on population size. Then you have New Jersey, who's a small state, and it says, we need to protect our small states. We should all have one vote. We should all be equal. And so we're going to have a struggle here. We need to figure out how can we come to a compromise and get both pieces of the pie. And so a guy from Connecticut comes forward and gives his Connecticut plan, or the Connecticut Compromise as it's come to known. But for the AP exam, mainly it's known as the Great Compromise in most questions I've seen. And the Great Compromise said this: let's put both of your plans together. We're both going to get a strong national government. We will agree on that. We are also going to have two houses in this new government, a bicameral legislature. Bi meaning two, cameral meaning house. So two house legislature. So this is who's going to be making all of our laws for our country. And these two houses are going to be known as the House of Representatives and the Senate. Now, the House of Representatives is going to be based on population size. So the Virginia plan is right there. So they're super happy. All right, we got one house that's represented by population size. So this is protecting the big states, the House of Reps. Now, for California, we fluctuate between 51 and 53 representatives, but it's because we are the biggest state in the United States. So we have the most representatives because we have the most people that need to be represented. So big states like California, we love the House of Representatives, and they are elected directly by the people. Now, the Senate took the New Jersey plan and was like, all right, we know that you also want to be protected small states. So what they said is all states would have the same number of seats. Now today, California only has 2 senators. Virginia only has 2 senators. New Jersey has 2 senators. So regardless of your size, you have 2 senators. And so that's protecting the small states. Now, a slightly different voting would be used for the Senate. They are not elected by the people, at least not until the 17th Amendment. Prior to the 17th Amendment, all of the senators were elected by the state legislatures. So the state government was the ones who were in charge of electing senators. And it was a way to kind of keep power out of uneducated people's hands. It was a way to kind of keep the more elite and educated people representing us in the government. But once the 17th Amendment was passed, we can start electing our senators. We'll go more into that kind of election process when we cover the legislative branch. But what you need to know is that this compromise, it basically put the New Jersey plan and Virginia plan together, and you're going to have 2 houses, one representing big states and one representing small states, the Senate and the House of Reps. That's the big takeaways from the Great Compromise. Now, they also had to figure out what else do we need to cover in this Constitutional Convention. Because remember, the Constitutional Convention that we're talking about is from 1787 to 1789. That's when our Constitution was really put together. And so some of the things that they brought up and said, what we need to be able to do this was they said, this new Congress that we put together, this new government that we put together, they got to be able to do a few things. One, they got to be able to control trade and, create tariffs. And they also have to be able to have a national currency. We can't have New York have its own currency and North Carolina have its own currency because that just doesn't work. And then lastly, they said we needed a stronger national defense. We need some sort of way to have a national army or navy. And as you can see, these are all kind of the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation. So our founding fathers, they actually really looked at it and said, we need to change this. We need to revise this. And so what they did is they said, we need to fix the economy. We need to fix the way we get money. And then we need a national defense. Now, something that Congress could not touch. They couldn't make laws about it. They really couldn't make any regulations about it. And this was really to protect the slave states or the bigger kind of you could say, the economically important states down in the South because they had a lot of slaves. And these states wanted to protect their slaves because they were important for their economy. Now, what Congress said they would not do was they said they would not limit the slave trade for a minimum of 20 years, which basically meant that these southern states would be safe in knowing that slavery would not be touched for at least 20 years. So they knew that they were protected up basically for 20 more years. Now, this is probably the saddest thing that was put in our Constitution, one of our founding documents. It's sad that this was even an issue, but it's called the 3/5 Clause. You may have covered this in U.S. history, but what it basically broke down was that these southern states, they had a lot of slaves. Now, they also wanted more representation in Congress, because when you have representation, you can vote on things, and you can vote on more things if you have more people. Now, they had a lot of slaves, but these southern states, they didn't want those slaves to be considered a full person. I know it sounds messed up, but that's what they thought. Now, what they said was that each slave would be counted as 3/5 of a person when it came to state representation. So when they basically came together and counted up the population and tried to figure out how many representatives you had, they would count all your slaves, and each slave would count as 3/5 of a person. And this was known as the 3/5 Clause or the 3/5 Compromise. Now, what it did was it basically said that we understand slaves are human, but we do not want to count them as a full person in our new country or our new government. But in order to appease these southern states, we are going to still count them in state representation. We're just going to count them as 3/5 of a person. So this is known as the 3/5 Clause. It's known as the 3/5 Compromise. It's one of those sad things that was put in our foundational documents that you wish you could just erase. But we will talk more about kind of these arguments for and against ratification of this new government, this new constitution in Unit 2.2. And we're going to be really focusing on the arguments from the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. Thank you and enjoy.